this one really needs no introduction, but David Culham, an old friend of this council and regional council member, I think for a quarter century, from Mississauga, who I had the privilege of sitting beside for 25 years, by the way, I might add. I was very blessed, him on one side and Hazel on the other. Still indebted to both of them, so thank you. David, welcome.
You are the only one that still survives, but we're in healthy hands here today. I'm concerned about the background philosophy that creeps into this because of other issues around the country. What I'm prepared to say today pales in significance with what has occurred, and it's a good thing that I'm going to the gym after to get rid of that higher blood pressure, but it's certainly not boring or dull, the proceedings. But I remind you that it comes out of an evolutionary process of history, of responsible government that doesn't occur in the rest of the world, and that you are part of that history, a good history. Now, I looked at the photograph. I was on the first council, and time and a haircut certainly changes your facial furniture, and it'll happen to you as it happens to me. But 5 years ago, I had a bedside opportunity to watch a nursing team at work when I had a cancerous tumor removed. They were a diverse group of people from all over the world. Diversity is a colorful, factual aspect of Canadian life, and a good one. Yet diversity was not their strength. That slogan is attributed to Prime Minister Trudeau and his philosophy, and I would hope that it would disappear with him. Their strength was in their common education, nursing education, their commitment, and in the philosophy of the hospital of teamwork. And it's beautiful to watch, because I watch all systems around me as happening, and it was beautiful. Now, I'm not privileged by my bleached skin, but by my living in Mississauga with such close friends from all over the world. I had the privilege of going to India twice with a friend from there, and I went to China with another friend that happened to come from Singapore. I'm privileged, there's no question, but it has nothing to do with my facial color. I thank Gary and Juliet for meeting with us to better familiarize ourselves with the DEI program. And there's a solid program there. We have good staff in these positions, and so that is not my problem or my concern with DEI. Launching into a 5-year program, however, is different in this tight budget cycle, and it requires more scrutiny. And I think the scrutiny is wanting. Now, let me just deal 7 items that I want to. First, the language in the report, in such terms as decolonization, indicates the background philosophy of postmodern Marxists, which I've been reading a great deal lately, but not from activists, but from philosophers. With all the ideological baggage of critical race theory, the assertion of systemic racism and white privilege, and much more than a little historical with validity. I'm heartened that there's no mention of quotas by staff, but the intent of our universities and our federal and provincial bureaucracies is quotas that appear for the first time in your Peel Regional Force budget. Quotas in electric cars goes along with quotas on race and creed, and it's a mistake. It is a pernicious ideology that is behind the tearing down of historical statues of Ryerson and MacDonald and replacing our history with a different narrative, a Marxist one. Most of us are here dependent on the work that Ryerson did in providing a foundation of education in this province, and he should be ever thankful, as I am. In conjunction with this is the idea of making race and ethnicity a factor in purchasing of services and goods instead of quality and cost. To use a modern Canadian example, the federal government requires its departments and agencies to have at least 5% of the total value of their contracts held by Indigenous businesses. But as was uncovered from the Arrive-Can scandal, a single 2-person firm received more than $200 million in federal contracts from 2015 onwards by bidding on tenders and set aside for Indigenous businesses and then subcontracting them out to others that could actually do the job. There have been serious mistakes in DEI elsewhere, and I think you can't get away from it. There was a principal of a school in Toronto that tragically committed suicide because of the open abuse by the DEI consultant. So too, I've followed the economist, black economist at Harvard, Dr. Roland Fryer, who was set aside by former President Claudine Gay when she was the DEI head. Why? Because his findings were different than hers, and so she censored them. So come to the aspect of, if I could for my age, the concept of systemic racism and of white privilege is disputed by Matthew Lau, and maybe you've all read it. But what he found was that Asians and South Asians hold the highest earnings and academic achievements, with whites only in the middle. So how do people come to this country and who come to the top if there's systemic racism? It's an assertion. It's not a fact of life. There is certainly racism, but systemic racism, no way. Now, much of this occurred because of, in the poverty area, and it's, again, Matthew Lau and others who are big on finance, has indicated that if you start this by doing it on racial matters, that most of the people that are poor would be held aside because they happen to be white. The largest, huge bulk of people that are poor are white. Many institutions were encouraged into the DEI program by McKinsey and Company and their studies, an international consulting firm. It started in 2015 and 2020. However, the scholarly journal Echo Journal Watch, is in trying to replicate McKinsey's company results in 2004, found that their work was flawed with no real statistical significance. And maybe you would understand why some are now dropping out of it. And my last point is Professor David Haskell, reviewing all the studies in 2024, found that contrary to the assertion that DEI programs lessen bigotry and create harmony, they did not. So I encourage you to, as you go on, I encourage the staff, have more fundamental ideology and concepts behind your work rather than allow these other ideas to come in because they've been wrong and you have the opportunity. You have a DEI program. This is a 5-year program that I think you should defer. I concur with my colleagues that came forward. We've been studying it together. Thank you.
David, thank you very much for your presentation.